Firemen tried to put out a warehouse blaze. Eels and fish died by the hundreds of thousands. The cleanup could take years. The leaders of Japan and the Western industrial nations were all smiles at the Tokyo summit. But when it was over, they had reached little agreement on how to solve the world's economic problems. Still, President Reagan called the meeting a triumph. He persuaded the members of the summit to take a united stand against terrorism. The Pope spread the gospel to the four corners of the world this year. His travels took him to Asia, Europe, South America, and Australia. And religious leaders from the four corners of the world came to the Pope. Together they prayed for a worldwide day of peace. And finally, another British royal couple tied the knot this year. In a resplendent ceremony at Westminster Abbey, Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson exchanged vows. But the biggest cheers were reserved for the traditional balcony kiss. For the Year in Review, I'm Bobby Batista.
More ahead on the Year in Review after this.
Life is an opportunity, and it's only limited. What you want to do and what you can achieve is only limited by what you can dream about.
The farm ponds drying up, creeks are drying up, wells drying up, everything's drying up.
The pilots of a strange, spindly airplane called Voyager secured their place in history with a magnificent flying feat. Dick Rutan and Gina Yeager completed a nonstop journey around the world on one load of fuel. For 9 days, they battled technical snafus, violent storms, and physical exhaustion in a cockpit the size of a pop tent. But they realized their dream after logging 25,000 miles.
Because it was the last event in aviation, the last first that could ever be achieved. And it's a little more of a challenge than the normal records that we've gone after before. And to be able to do it was just something that we had to do.
Life is an opportunity, and it's only limited. What you want to do and what you can achieve is only limited by what you can dream about. And if you can conceive it, it's possible.
President Reagan plans to honor the pilots tomorrow in Los Angeles, awarding citizens' medals to Rutan, Yeager, and Rutan's brother, Bert, the designer of the Voyager.
Another Voyager soared into the headlines this year. The U.S. spacecraft Voyager 2 made an arduous journey into outer space, sending back startling close-up views of the planet Uranus. The spacecraft discovered new moons and rings and provided the first evidence of the planet's magnetic field. It took Voyager nearly a decade to approach the mysterious planet, about 2 billion miles from Earth, but it made more discoveries in a few hours than astronomers have been able to gather in the past 2 centuries.
A devastating drought ravaged the American Southeast this year. In other parts of the world, nature's unpredictability produced even more deadly disasters.
Out of the African night, without warning, the cloud of death rolled silently down through sleeping villages in northern Cameroon. Hundreds of people suffocated in their sleep. Entire families were wiped out. Miraculously, a few people managed to escape and warn the rest of the country. Scientists say it was poisonous gas from a volcanic lake, probably released by a landslide or earthquake. More than 1,700 people died in the Cameroon death cloud, but the real toll may never be known because hundreds were buried without being counted. El Salvador, already plagued by civil war and a weak economy, was hit by a devastating earthquake that killed more than 1,000 people, injured 10,000, and left 200,000 homeless. Every government building in the capital city of San Salvador was in ruins or damaged. Hotels, hospitals, and homes were in shambles. Property loss alone in San Salvador was estimated at $2 billion. The South was hit by the worst drought in 100 years.
The farm ponds drying up, creeks are drying up, wells drying up, everything's drying up.
Debt-ridden farmers faced economic ruin. Cattle and other livestock went without food and water. Midwestern farmers organized massive hay lifts that helped save livestock and win friends.
We want to call them the good old boys. And, you know, that's a Southern saying, but we have to classify them Illinois people as good old boys.
While the Southeast shriveled under a merciless sun, the West and Midwest had to battle to stay above water. Torrential downpours inundated West Coast states. And later in the year, heavy rains caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage to Midwestern states from Michigan to Oklahoma. Thousands were forced from their homes, and Michigan alone reported $300 million in property and crop damage. Volcanoes erupted in Japan and Hawaii, putting on spectacular visual displays. On the Japanese island of Oshima, 11,000 people were swiftly evacuated when Mount Mahara erupted for the first time in 12 years. Like a gigantic cauldron, Hawaii's Mount Kilauea bubbled over with molten lava, sending fiery rivers surging to the sea. Scores of homes were consumed as the lava burned through forests to build a black beach where it touched the ocean. But again, people in the path of the molten lava were evacuated safely. Alaska's Hubbard Glacier pushed across Russell Fjord and created an instant inland lake 40 miles long. It also created an instant trap for hundreds of porpoises and seals. For weeks, the fate of the animals was in doubt, but finally nature relented. The 300-foot ice dam broke up, and the porpoises and seals made it out on their own. For the Year in Review, I'm Pat Etheridge.
The Year in Review will continue with a look back at Hands Across America.
The biggest, brightest 4th of July ever.
To halt the spread of AIDS stepped up this year. The World Health Organization declared it a global problem and spearheaded international programs to combat the deadly disease. The Food and Drug Administration cut through red tape to give quick approval to a promising new drug called AZT. Early studies show the drug prolongs the lives of those receiving it. Without a cure, estimates are that as many as 3 million people will have the disease in just 5 years.
From tax reform to a taxing time for the president, 1986 proved to be one of the most volatile political years this decade.
It was a political year, the midpoint in President Reagan's final term, and it was a year of political change when the voting booth was as important as the White House and Capitol Hill. President Reagan campaigned long and hard for Republican candidates, but the Democrats won big in November. The Democrats took over control of the Senate and maintained control in the House. That cast doubt on the future of Reagan's policies, but the president vows he would not be a lame duck in his final 2 years. Primaries across the nation focused on local candidates and issues, but gave potential presidential candidates a chance to test their voter appeal. TV evangelist Pat Robertson was a fresh face in politics, but primary voters didn't show great enthusiasm for any of the presidential hopefuls. Followers of extremist Lyndon LaRouche upset some political apple carts, notably Adlai Stevenson Jr.'s bid to become governor of Illinois. The president nominated William Rehnquist, the Supreme Court's most consistent conservative, to succeed retiring Chief Justice Warren Burger. That stirred a hornet's nest of protests from civil rights leaders, women's groups, and others. Rehnquist endured days of hostile questioning in the Senate before confirmation as Chief Justice. Antonin Scalia, another conservative, easily won confirmation to replace Rehnquist. Periodic flaps added fuel to the political fires. President Reagan's new National Security Council chief, Admiral John Poindexter, authored a policy of disinformation about U.S. intentions towards Libya. The news media, riled because it was a victim, asked what was the difference between disinformation and just plain lying. The wheels of government continued to turn. A stepped-up campaign against drug abuse stretched from Washington office buildings, where employees up to cabinet level were asked to take urine tests, to the Bolivian jungles, where U.S. air crews helped local officials try to track down cocaine producers. Federal prosecution of reputed mafia leaders brought a string of convictions and claims that at long last the mob was on the run. The Attorney General's Pornography Commission turned in a controversial report linking sexual films and publications to violence against women. Tax reform is like the weather. Everybody talks about it, nobody does much about it. This year, after a long and often bitter struggle, Congress managed to agree on a tax reform package. In October, President Reagan signed into law the most sweeping tax overhaul in 40 years. The new tax law lowers tax rates for individuals and corporations, but repeals or limits many widely used deductions and credits. Among those who will be paying taxes are some who enter the country illegally. Congress passed a major revision of the immigration laws, cracking down on the hiring of illegal aliens, but offering amnesty and residency to millions of others arrived before 1982. For the Year in Review, I'm Molly McCoy.